The air was cool that morning, the kind that made you pull your coat a little tighter. Mrs. Allen sat quietly in the back seat of her car as it rolled through the narrow road leading to the small-town cemetery. The rain had stopped, leaving behind tiny drops of water clinging to the trees. She looked out of the window, her reflection faint against the glass. Every Sunday for the last 3 years she had taken this same drive. It had become part of her life, a painful ritual she couldn't let go of. Her driver slowed down as the gates came into view. The old iron sign above the entrance creaked as the wind pushed against it. Mrs. Allen's heart felt heavy. She was used to this feeling now, the tightness in her chest, the silent ache that came whenever she thought about her son. He had been her only child, the one she loved more than anything, and losing him had changed everything. When the car stopped, she stepped out slowly, holding an umbrella. Her heels sank slightly into the wet ground as she walked along the familiar path. She carried fresh white roses in her hand, his favorite. The smell of rain mixed with the faint scent of flowers as she made her way through the rows of graves. Her son's grave was near the far corner, under a large oak tree. She could see it from a distance, the gray stone polished, the name engraved in bold letters. Her house staff came once a week to clean it, but she always brought her own flowers. It made her feel closer to him somehow, as if he could still see her. But that morning, something unusual caught her eye. Someone was already there. A woman, dressed in a simple dark jacket, was kneeling beside the grave. Beside her was a small boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, holding a small bunch of wildflowers. Mrs. Allen stopped a few steps away, unsure what to do. She had never seen anyone else at her son's grave before. The woman was crying softly, one hand resting on the tombstone. The child looked up at her, confused, then back at his mother. Mrs. Allen felt an odd mix of surprise and discomfort. She wanted to ask who they were, but something in the woman's quiet grief made her stay silent. She stood there for a while, hidden behind the umbrella, watching. The woman finally wiped her tears and helped the boy stand. They placed the small flowers carefully beside the white roses from last week. Then the boy whispered something that Mrs. Allen couldn't hear, and they walked away hand in hand, disappearing down the path. Mrs. Allen waited until they were gone before stepping closer. She stared at the flowers they had left. They were just wild daisies, simple and small but placed with care. She bent down and touched them gently. Her thoughts were spinning. Who were they? And why would a stranger visit her son's grave? The rest of the day she couldn't get the image out of her head. That little boy's face, something about it tugged at her heart. His eyes especially. There was something familiar about them, though she couldn't explain what. That night she sat alone in her large dining room. The long table stretched out before her, but only one side was set. The ticking of the clock echoed against the walls. She pushed her food around her plate but barely took a bite. Her butler noticed her silence but knew better than to ask. Mrs. Allen wasn't the kind of woman who liked to talk about her feelings. Later, when she went upstairs, she stopped by her son's old room. It was exactly the same as he'd left it. His books neatly lined up on the shelves, a framed photograph of them on the desk, and the faint scent of his cologne still clinging to the curtains. She walked in slowly and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the picture. Her son's smile stared back at her, warm and bright. Who were they? She whispered under her breath. Why were they crying for you? The next morning she decided she needed answers. A week passed and Sunday came again. This time she left earlier than usual. When she arrived at the cemetery, the woman was already there once more, kneeling at the same spot. The boy sat quietly beside her, drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick. Mrs. Allen's pulse quickened. She hesitated for a moment, then finally stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said gently. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were red, her face pale from the cold wind. I'm sorry to disturb you," Mrs. Allen continued. "I just wanted to ask, do you know the person buried here?" The woman hesitated before nodding.
"Yes," she said softly.
"I knew him." Mrs. Allen blinked, surprised. "You knew my son?" The woman looked down at the grave again. "He was kind to me," she said quietly. "He helped me when no one else would." The boy tugged at her sleeve, and she smiled faintly at him before standing up. "We should go," she said quickly, her voice shaking slightly. "Wait," Mrs. Allen said. "Please, tell me more." But the woman only shook her head. "I don't want to cause any trouble," she said. Then she took the boy's hand and began to walk away. Mrs. Allen watched them go, her heart pounding. The woman's words echoed in her mind. He helped me when no one else would. Her son had always been kind, yes, but he'd also been restless, secretive. There were things about his life she had never understood, places he went without telling her, people he met that she never knew about. Back in her car, she told her driver to follow them at a distance. She wasn't proud of it, but curiosity had taken hold of her. The car trailed quietly behind the woman and the boy until they reached a small roadside diner. The sign outside read, "Millie's Place." Mrs. Allen watched as the woman led the boy inside, then tied her apron and began serving tables. A waitress. Mrs. Allen sat back, deep in thought. She couldn't imagine her wealthy, outgoing son having any connection to a small-town waitress. But maybe that was just her pride talking. Maybe she had never truly known everything about him. The next day, Mrs. Allen returned to the diner alone. She wore a simple coat and scarf, hoping not to draw attention. The moment she stepped inside, the smell of coffee and fried eggs filled the air. The woman from the cemetery, Lena according to her name tag, looked surprised but didn't say anything. Mrs. Allen sat at the counter and ordered tea. For a few minutes they didn't speak. Then Lena approached with the cup, her hands trembling slightly. "You came here on purpose," she said quietly. "Yes," Mrs. Allen admitted. "I wanted to talk. About my son." Lena hesitated, then nodded and sat across from her. The diner was nearly empty. "He came here often," she said after a pause. "He stayed at a motel near the highway whenever he was in town. One night he found me crying behind the diner. I was short on rent and I thought I'd lose my home. He gave me the money I needed, said it wasn't charity, just a favor between friends." Mrs. Allen listened quietly, her throat tight. "He came back a few times after that," Lena continued. "Always smiling, always kind. He'd bring toys for Caleb sometimes." She nodded toward the little boy sitting in the corner booth eating pancakes. "He said the world needed more laughter." Mrs. Allen turned to look at the child. His big brown eyes met hers and she felt that strange pull again, like she'd seen him somewhere before. "He sounds like the man I raised," she said softly. Lena smiled faintly, but her eyes filled with tears. "He talked about you," she said. "He loved you very much." Mrs. Allen looked down at her hands. "Then why didn't he ever tell me about you?" she whispered. Lena didn't answer. She stood up quickly, murmuring something about getting back to work. Mrs. Allen watched her go, feeling more questions than answers. When she left the diner, the wind had picked up again. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds. As her car pulled away, she glanced once more through the window. Lena was laughing at something the boy said, her face lit with warmth. The sight made something ache deep inside her chest. That night she couldn't sleep again. She walked to her son's old room, opened the window and looked out at the dark sky. The sound of rain began tapping softly against the glass. She thought about the woman at the grave, the child with the familiar eyes, and her son who had carried secrets to his grave. Something inside her whispered that this was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The next few days felt strangely quiet for Mrs. Allen. She went about her usual work meetings and phone calls, but her mind kept drifting back to that small diner on the highway. She could still see Lena's face, the sadness in her eyes, and the little boy's curious stare. Something about them pulled her in, like a story half finished. On Wednesday evening, she sat by her window with a cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker below. Her mansion stood high above the streets, grand and quiet, but it felt empty. Too empty. The rooms were filled with everything money could buy, but not with the one thing she missed the most: laughter. Her son's laughter used to echo down the hallways, loud and carefree. Now there was only silence. That night she opened the box of her son's old things again. There were photos, his college degree, and a few letters he had written but never sent. As she looked through them, she found one envelope that had never been opened. It was addressed to her, but there was no stamp, no date. She carefully tore it open. Inside was a short note written in her son's handwriting. "Mom, if something ever happens to me, please don't be angry with the choices I made. I tried to do the right thing. I found someone who reminded me that kindness still matters. If you ever meet her, be gentle. She's been through enough." Her hands trembled slightly as she read it again. The letter didn't mention a name, but she felt deep down it was connected to the woman at the diner. The next morning, she decided to go back there. When she arrived, the bell above the door jingled softly. The diner was half full, the smell of pancakes and coffee hanging in the air. Lena noticed her right away, surprise flashing in her eyes. She hesitated, then smiled politely and walked over. "You're back," she said quietly. "Yes," Mrs. Allen replied. "I hope you don't mind." "Not at all," Lena said, though her tone was unsure. "Would you like your usual tea?" Mrs. Allen nodded. She watched Lena move behind the counter, taking orders and chatting with customers. She was different from the women Mrs. Allen usually met at business events. There was no pretense in her. Her kindness was simple, real. When Lena finally came back with the tea, Mrs. Allen said softly, "I found something. A letter. My son wrote it before he passed. He mentioned someone. I think he was talking about you." Lena froze. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she sat down slowly, her hands shaking. "He told me he wanted to tell you," she whispered. "He said he was waiting for the right time." Mrs. Allen looked at her closely. "Tell me, please. I need to know." Lena took a deep breath. "I met him here about 5 years ago," she began. "He came in one night when the place was almost empty. I was new, struggling to pay rent, working late shifts while raising Caleb. He noticed I looked tired. We talked for a while, and he said something that made me laugh for the first time in weeks. From that day, he came back often. Sometimes just for coffee, sometimes just to talk. He never acted like he was better than me. He listened, her voice softened. When my landlord threatened to evict me, he found out somehow. He gave me money to cover it. I tried to refuse, but he said it was just a favor between friends. That's who he was, always helping." Mrs. Allen smiled faintly. "That sounds like him." Lena nodded. "He used to tell me stories about his childhood, about how you'd take him to the beach every summer. He missed you a lot, you know. He said he wished he could make you proud." Mrs. Allen's throat tightened. She looked away for a moment, blinking back tears. Then she noticed the boy again, Caleb, sitting at a corner booth, coloring on a napkin. His tiny hands were covered in crayon marks, his hair curling slightly at the ends. He looked up at her and smiled. That same warmth she'd seen in her son's eyes flashed for a second. "He looks a lot like him," Mrs. Allen whispered. Lena froze again, then forced a small smile. "People say that sometimes." Mrs. Allen studied her face but didn't press further. She could tell Lena wasn't ready to open that door yet. The two women sat there for a while longer, sharing quiet conversation. When Mrs. Allen stood to leave, she said, "You should come by the house one day. Caleb would like the garden. It's peaceful there." Lena looked surprised but polite. "That's very kind of you," she said softly. "Maybe one day." As Mrs. Allen drove home, she couldn't stop thinking about that maybe. Over the next few weeks, she started visiting the diner more often. Sometimes she'd come just for tea. Other times, she'd bring small gifts for Caleb, picture books, a toy car, a warm scarf. Lena always tried to refuse, but Mrs. Allen would smile and say, "It's just a little something for a good boy." Slowly, a friendship began to grow between them. Lena would tell her bits and pieces about her life, how she worked 2 jobs to keep up with bills, how Caleb was starting school soon, how she wished she could give him more than she had. Mrs. Allen listened quietly, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, connection. One afternoon, Mrs. Allen arrived earlier than usual. The diner was quiet, with only a few people inside. She sat at her regular spot by the window. Outside, the sky was gray again, and the wind carried the smell of rain. Lena came over with a smile. "You're early today." "I had a meeting nearby," Mrs. Allen said. "Thought I'd stop by." They talked for a while, and Mrs. Allen couldn't help but notice how natural it felt. It wasn't like her usual conversations with business partners or friends from her social circle. There was no pretending, just 2 women talking about life, loss, and small joys. But there was one thing Mrs. Allen couldn't shake, the thought of Caleb's eyes. The more she saw him, the more certain she became. The shape, the color, even the way he smiled, it all reminded her of her son. That night, she pulled out her son's old photo album again. She placed a picture of him as a child beside the memory of Caleb in her mind. The resemblance was undeniable. The next time she met Lena, she finally asked the question that had been haunting her. "Lena," she said softly, "please don't be upset. But is my son Caleb's father?" Lena's hand froze midair. The cup she was holding clinked against the counter. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she set it down carefully and sat across from Mrs. Allen. Her eyes were full of tears. "I didn't want to hide it forever," she whispered. "I just didn't know how to tell you. I thought you'd hate me. I didn't want you to think I wanted money or help." Mrs. Allen's heart ached at the words. "Hate you?" she said gently. "No, never. I just wish I'd known. I wish he'd told me." Lena wiped her face with the corner of her apron. "He wanted to. He said he would take me to meet you. But then," her voice broke. "Then he was gone. And I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I promised him I'd take care of Caleb on my own." Tears welled in Mrs. Allen's eyes. She reached across the table and took Lena's hand. "You did take care of him," she said softly. "You've done wonderfully." They sat there for a while, both silent, both crying quietly. There were no big words needed. Just the shared understanding of love and loss. When Mrs. Allen left that day, she didn't go home right away. She drove to the cemetery instead. The air was cool and still. She stood before her son's grave, holding a single white rose. "You never told me," she whispered. "But I understand now." She looked up at the cloudy sky. "You left a part of yourself behind, and I promise I'll protect them, both of them." For the first time in years, she felt peace in her heart. The next day, she went back to the diner again, but this time with a small gift, a simple bracelet with a silver heart charm. She gave it to Lena, saying quietly, "This was my son's favorite gift to give. He used to say hearts should be shared, not hidden." Lena smiled through tears and hugged her tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. From that day forward, their visits became more frequent. Mrs. Allen would often pick Caleb up from school, and he'd run to her with excitement. She'd take him to the park, buy him ice cream, and tell him stories about his father, stories that made him smile and ask for more. Slowly, something began to heal inside all of them. The past still hurt, but love had found its way back in the most unexpected form. And though Mrs. Allen didn't say it out loud yet, she knew deep in her heart she had found her grandson. The days that followed were strange for Mrs. Allen. Everything in her life still looked the same. Her mansion, her car, her busy office filled with assistants, but something inside her had changed. It was as if the world had shifted slightly, revealing a truth she was never prepared for. She had a grandson. She found herself smiling more often now, thinking of Caleb's laughter. The sound of his voice still echoed in her mind, full of warmth and innocence. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see his face, the same spark her son once had when he was little. It brought her comfort, but also a deep ache of regret. How many birthdays had she missed? How many times had Lena struggled alone while she had lived surrounded by luxury? That thought stayed with her as she prepared a small box of toys and books one morning. She decided to visit them again at the diner. When she arrived, the place was busy. The lunch crowd filled the tables, and Lena was moving quickly between them, balancing plates and cups with practiced ease. But when she saw Mrs. Allen, her face softened. She quickly came over and led her to a quiet corner. "You didn't have to come today," Lena said with a gentle smile. "I wanted to," Mrs. Allen replied, "and I brought something for Caleb." She placed the small box on the table. Inside was a set of children's storybooks, a little wooden car, and a red scarf. When Caleb saw it, his eyes lit up with joy. "Thank you, Grandma," he said without hesitation. Mrs. Allen froze for a second. The word Grandma hung in the air between them, soft but powerful. She looked at Lena, who gave a small, nervous smile. "It just slipped out," Lena said quietly. But Mrs. Allen's eyes filled with tears. "No," she whispered. "It's the sweetest thing I've heard in years." That single word broke the wall that had silently stood between them. From that moment, something shifted. Mrs. Allen started visiting more often, not as a stranger or a customer, but as part of their small world. Sometimes she'd pick Caleb up from school when Lena had to work late. Other times she'd bring groceries, pretending it was extra food from the estate. Lena always tried to refuse, but Mrs. Allen would just smile and say, "Don't argue with an old woman trying to help." One evening, after closing the diner, Lena invited her to have coffee. The two women sat outside on the wooden steps, the night quiet around them. The stars were faint above the streetlights, and the sound of crickets filled the air. "I still can't believe how everything happened," Lena said softly. "Some days it feels like he's still around, you know? Like he's watching us. Mrs. Allen nodded slowly. I feel that too. I think he would have wanted this, us finding each other. Lena looked down at her hands. He loved you a lot. He talked about you often. He said he wished he had more time to make you proud. Mrs. Allen's eyes watered. I was already proud. I just never told him enough. She paused, her voice trembling. I thought being strict would make him stronger, more focused. But I should have just loved him more openly. Lena reached over and gently touched her hand. He knew you loved him. They sat there for a long time, sharing stories about her son's little habits, his favorite songs, and the silly jokes he used to make. For the first time, Mrs. Allen felt like her grief was finally softening. In the weeks that followed, she started bringing Caleb to her home on weekends. The first time he came, he ran through the wide hallway with wide eyes. Everything fascinated him, the grand piano, the paintings, the tall staircase. You live in a castle, he said with excitement. Mrs. Allen laughed. Something like that. But it's too quiet without laughter. He grinned. Then I'll laugh a lot when I come here. And he did. His laughter filled every corner of that house, bringing life back into rooms that had felt cold for years. Even the house staff smiled more often when he visited. But while everything seemed perfect, Mrs. Allen could sense something else in Lena. A quiet worry that lingered behind her smiles. One evening, as they sat in the garden watching Caleb chase butterflies, Mrs. Allen finally asked, "What's on your mind, dear?" Lena hesitated before speaking. It's just, sometimes I'm afraid this is all too good to be true. You've done so much for us.
I don't want to feel like we're a burden. Mrs. Allen's heart ached.
A burden? You and Caleb are my family now. There's no burden in love. Lena looked away, her voice soft. People might not understand. A rich woman and a waitress. They'll talk. Mrs. Allen smiled kindly. Let them talk. They don't know our story. Still, Lena's unease didn't fade easily. She was proud, and she'd worked hard for everything she had. Accepting help, even from someone as kind as Mrs. Allen, wasn't easy for her. A few days later, an unexpected event brought their worlds closer and tested their bond. Mrs. Allen received a call from the diner owner. Lena had fainted at work. The moment she heard, she rushed there immediately. When she arrived, Lena was sitting on a bench outside, pale and weak. Caleb stood beside her, clutching her hand. What happened? Mrs. Allen asked anxiously. Just exhaustion, Lena said with a tired smile. I've been working too many hours lately. Mrs. Allen frowned. You should have told me. You need rest. I can't afford to take time off, Lena said quietly. Bills don't stop and I have Caleb to think about. Mrs. Allen sighed deeply. You're not alone anymore. Please let me help. Lena started to protest, but Mrs. Allen gently placed a hand on her shoulder. You've carried everything on your own for too long. Let me carry a little of it now. That night, Mrs. Allen took Lena and Caleb back to her estate. She insisted they stay until Lena felt better. At first, Lena refused, but when Caleb fell asleep in the car, she finally agreed. In the days that followed, Mrs. Allen's home was filled with warmth again. Lena cooked in the kitchen with the house staff, and Caleb ran through the gardens with laughter echoing behind him. For the first time in years, Mrs. Allen felt her house was alive. One evening, Lena found Mrs. Allen in her study, looking at an old photo of her son. You know, Lena said softly, he used to talk about this house. He said it was beautiful but too big for one person. Mrs. Allen smiled faintly. He was right. It felt like a cage after he was gone. Lena hesitated. Do you ever get angry with him? For keeping us a secret? Mrs. Allen thought for a long moment before answering. I used to. But now I understand. He probably wanted to protect us both, from judgment, from misunderstanding. Maybe he thought the world wouldn't accept it. But I would have loved you both the same. Lena's eyes glistened. I believe that. As the days went on, their bond grew stronger. Mrs. Allen began to see Lena not just as her son's past love, but as the daughter she never had. And Caleb, he became the light that filled every dark space in her heart. One afternoon, Mrs. Allen took them to the cemetery. She wanted them to go together, not separately. They stood side by side before the grave. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of grass and earth. Mrs. Allen placed fresh white roses on the stone. Lena knelt beside her, laying down a small bunch of daisies, the same kind she used to bring before. Caleb stood quietly between them, holding their hands. For a while no one spoke. Then Mrs. Allen whispered, "You brought her strength. You brought me peace. Thank you, my boy." Lena closed her eyes, tears falling silently. She could almost feel his presence around them, gentle and warm. When they left, Caleb ran ahead on the path, laughing. Mrs. Allen and Lena walked slowly behind him, their hands brushing lightly. "Do you ever think he'd be proud of us?" Lena asked softly. Mrs. Allen smiled. "I know he would." That evening, as the sun set painting the sky orange and gold, Mrs. Allen sat in her garden watching Caleb play. Lena joined her with 2 cups of tea. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their thoughts. Finally, Mrs. Allen said, "You know, for a long time I thought I had everything. Money, success, a name that mattered. But now I realize I had nothing without love. You and Caleb gave me that again." Lena smiled gently. "And you gave us family, it was true." Their lives had been built from 2 different worlds, but somehow grief had brought them together, healing them both. As the stars began to appear, Mrs. Allen looked at Caleb chasing fireflies and whispered softly, "I think this is what my son wanted all along, to bring us together." And for the first time in years, her heart felt whole. That night, the house felt quieter than usual. Mrs. Allen sat in her living room, staring at an old photo of her son on the mantel. His smile in that picture seemed to follow her wherever she went. She ran her fingers gently over the frame, whispering his name under her breath. For years, she had lived with nothing but memories. Now those memories had a new meaning. Somewhere out there, a part of him was still alive. His little boy, Caleb. It had been a few days since Lena told her the truth, and the words still echoed in her ears. He wanted to tell you himself, but he never got the chance. Every time she thought of it, her chest tightened. She didn't know whether to cry or smile. She had spent years mourning her son, not realizing that his love had left behind something so precious. But beneath her happiness, she also felt regret. Regret for the time lost. Regret for the harsh words she had once said to her son when he chose to live away from home. Regret for never asking what made him so happy during those last months. She had been too focused on her business, too stubborn to listen. Now, life had quietly revealed the truth she didn't even know she needed. The next morning, she woke up early, determined to see Lena and Caleb again. She drove to the diner just as the sun was coming up. The air smelled of rain and coffee, and the neon sign flickered softly above the door. Lena was behind the counter, wiping down tables before customers arrived. When she saw Mrs. Allen walk in, she looked surprised but not upset. "You came early today," Lena said, forcing a small smile. "I couldn't sleep," Mrs. Allen replied softly. "I thought maybe we could talk." "If that's all right." Lena hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from her. There was silence at first, the kind of silence that feels heavy, filled with things that need to be said but are too hard to put into words. Finally, Mrs. Allen spoke. "I know this must have been hard for you, raising a child on your own, keeping such a secret. But I want you to know, I don't blame you." Lena looked down at her hands. "I didn't want you to think I was after money or attention. Your son loved you so much. He always said he wanted to fix things between you both. But when he passed, I didn't know how to reach out." Mrs. Allen's eyes softened. "You didn't have to be afraid." "If I had known—" She stopped mid-sentence. "No, I probably wouldn't have understood back then. I was so proud, so wrapped up in my world that I forgot what really mattered." Lena reached for her hand. "You were grieving." "We both were." They sat quietly for a while, both lost in thought. Then a small voice broke the silence. "Grandma!" They turned to see Caleb running out from the kitchen, a big smile on his face. Mrs. Allen froze for a moment. She hadn't heard him say that word before. But he said it again, louder this time, his arms open wide. "Grandma!" She bent down instinctively, her eyes filling with tears as she hugged him tightly. For the first time in years, her heart felt full. From that day on, things began to change. Mrs. Allen became a regular at the diner, not as a customer, but as a part of their little family. She'd bring fresh flowers every week for the tables and sometimes small gifts for Caleb, picture books, toy cars, or crayons. She didn't spoil him with expensive things, but with attention, stories, and love. Lena was still cautious. She had spent years being independent, working hard for everything she had. She wasn't used to anyone offering help, especially someone like Mrs. Allen, a woman of wealth and status. But slowly she began to see that Mrs. Allen's kindness wasn't out of pity. It was genuine. One afternoon, Mrs. Allen asked if they would like to visit the grave together. Lena hesitated at first, but eventually agreed. The next Sunday they went as a family, the billionaire, the waitress, and the little boy who unknowingly connected their worlds. It was a cloudy day. The ground was still wet from the rain the night before, and the air carried that quiet, peaceful scent only cemeteries seem to have. Mrs. Allen placed a bouquet of white lilies on the grave, while Lena added a small toy car Caleb had chosen himself. They stood together in silence. Then Mrs. Allen spoke softly, her voice trembling. "You left me too soon, my boy. But you gave me something beautiful before you went." Lena's eyes filled with tears. Caleb stood beside them, holding both their hands. Then he whispered something that made them both cry. "Daddy's sleeping, right?" Mrs. Allen nodded, trying to smile through her tears. "Yes, sweetheart. He's sleeping, but he's always watching over you." They stayed there for a long time, talking, remembering, and forgiving. It was the first time since her son's death that Mrs. Allen felt peace. After that day, their lives slowly intertwined. Mrs. Allen invited Lena and Caleb to her home for dinner one weekend. Lena felt nervous at first. The mansion was huge, filled with paintings, tall glass windows, and quiet hallways. She didn't feel like she belonged in such a place. But Mrs. Allen treated her like family, not like a guest. During dinner, Caleb laughed loudly, talking about his school friends and his favorite cartoons. His laughter echoed through the halls, a sound Mrs. Allen hadn't heard in years. It brought life back into that quiet house. Later that night, when Caleb fell asleep on the couch, Lena looked around and whispered, "He would have loved to see this. Your son, he always wanted his child to know where he came from." Mrs. Allen nodded, her eyes glistening. "He does now. And you've done an incredible job raising him." Lena smiled faintly. "I just wanted him to have a good life. I didn't care about anything else." Mrs. Allen looked at her for a long time before speaking again. "You remind me of him. The way you protect that boy, the way you keep going even when life hurts." That night after they left, Mrs. Allen stood by her window watching their car disappear down the long driveway. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. The emptiness that used to follow her around was slowly fading away. Over the next few weeks, she started spending more time with Caleb. She'd pick him up from school sometimes, or take him for ice cream. She even showed him old photo albums, his father's childhood pictures, the places they had traveled together, the toys he used to love. Caleb listened with wide eyes, asking question after question. One day, while looking at a photo of her son as a little boy, Caleb pointed and said, "He looks like me." Mrs. Allen smiled. "Yes, you have his eyes." Then he looked up at her and asked, "Do you miss him?" She nodded. "Every single day, but having you here makes it hurt less." That simple answer made him hug her tightly, and in that moment she realized that love can heal wounds, even time couldn't. Still, there were moments of tension. Lena sometimes worried about how much Mrs. Allen was getting involved in their lives. She didn't want to lose control or seem dependent. One evening, they had a small misunderstanding about Caleb's schooling. Mrs. Allen had suggested enrolling him in a private school, while Lena wanted him to stay where he was. "I just want what's best for him," Mrs. Allen said gently. "I know," Lena replied, trying to hold back her frustration. "But I've been doing what's best for him all along. I may not have money, but I know my son." The room went quiet. Then Mrs. Allen nodded slowly. "You're right. You know him better than anyone. I want to be part of his life, not to take control." Lena's expression softened. "And I want that too. I just need time to trust that this is real." They both smiled, understanding that healing takes time, not just for them, but for the bond they were building. One weekend, Mrs. Allen invited them again to visit her son's grave. This time she brought a small wooden bench to place nearby. On the back of it, a small plaque read, "For the love that never ended, and the family it left behind." When Lena saw it, she couldn't hold back her tears. She sat down on the bench beside Mrs. Allen, while Caleb ran around chasing butterflies between the headstones. "I think he would have liked this," Lena said softly. Mrs. Allen smiled. He would have loved it. As the sun dipped below the trees, painting the sky in shades of gold, the two women sat quietly side by side, not as strangers, but as two people brought together by love, loss, and the innocence of a little boy who unknowingly healed both their hearts. And for the first time in years, Mrs. Allen whispered to herself, "Thank you, my son, for leading me back to life." The wind brushed softly through the grass, almost like a reply, and though nothing in the world could bring her son back, she finally understood something she never had before: that love never really ends. It just changes form and finds its way back, often through the most unexpected hearts. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of their new life started to feel natural. Mrs. Allen had found a quiet joy in the simplest things: packing lunch with Lena, waiting outside Caleb's school, or reading him bedtime stories whenever they stayed at her house on weekends. The emptiness that once echoed through her mansion had slowly turned into laughter, tiny footsteps, and the warmth of love that she never thought she'd feel again. Still, there were moments when she would wake in the middle of the night and stare out the window, thinking about her son. Some nights she'd whisper to the dark sky, "I hope you can see us. I hope you're proud." She no longer cried with pain. She cried because she finally understood that love could live on, even after death. Lena had grown closer to her too. What had started as cautious politeness had turned into trust, even friendship. She often helped Mrs. Allen with things around the house, cooking meals or tending to the small garden in the back. Sometimes the two women would sit together on the porch with cups of tea, watching Caleb chase butterflies or play with the neighbor's dog. One afternoon as they sat there, Mrs. Allen spoke softly. "I've been thinking about something. I want to do something in his memory, not just for him but for you and Caleb too." Lena turned to her, curious. "What do you mean?" "I've spent years building hotels and businesses," Mrs. Allen said, "but none of it truly meant anything. I want to build something that actually helps people, something that reminds me of kindness, not profit." She paused for a moment, then smiled. "There's an old piece of land downtown near the park. I want to build a community center there, a place where kids can learn, where mothers can work, where families can find help when they need it. And I want to name it after him, Caleb's Corner." Lena's eyes widened. "Caleb's Corner?" she whispered. "That's beautiful," Mrs. Allen nodded. "It's not just for him. It's for all the people he'll inspire without even knowing it." For the first time since her son's death, Mrs. Allen felt a purpose stronger than her grief. Over the next few weeks, she began making calls, meeting with architects and city officials. She didn't tell anyone about her wealth or status. She wanted it to be a quiet project, something built with love, not publicity. Lena helped her with the plans, offering ideas about what the center could have: a small library, a daycare room, a cafe run by local women, and an area for after-school programs. She had spent her whole life working to survive. Now she was helping create something that could help others do the same. During those weeks, their bond deepened even more. Mrs. Allen often looked at Lena and thought how her son would have been proud of the woman he had loved. She admired her strength, the way she never complained, the way she always put Caleb first, the quiet dignity with which she faced life. One day, after a long meeting, they stopped by the cemetery together again. Caleb ran ahead as he always did, his laughter filling the quiet air. He placed fresh flowers on the grave and said proudly, "Daddy, Grandma says we're building something for you." Mrs. Allen smiled through her tears. "Yes, we are, sweetheart." Lena stood beside her, holding her hand. "He's going to change lives," she said softly, "just like his father did." The wind rustled gently through the trees, almost as if whispering back to them. Months passed, and the community center began to take shape. Mrs. Allen insisted on visiting the construction site every week. She wore a simple coat and hat, blending in with everyone else. She didn't want anyone to treat her differently. The workers soon came to know her as the kind lady who brings lunch. She'd often show up with sandwiches and lemonade, laughing and chatting with them as if she were one of their own. Caleb loved visiting too. He'd run around the open space, imagining where the playground would be. "Grandma, can we put a slide over there?" he'd ask, pointing to a sunny corner. "Of course," she'd say, smiling. "It'll be the best slide in town." When the building was finally completed, it stood tall and welcoming, painted in warm colors, filled with books, toys, and light. The sign above the door read simply, "Caleb's Corner, a place for hope and new beginnings." The opening ceremony was small but heartfelt. Families from the neighborhood gathered, some holding flowers, others just curious to see what had been built. Mrs. Allen stood beside Lena and Caleb at the entrance. Reporters had caught wind of the story, but she had politely declined interviews. "This isn't about me," she told them. "It's about community. It's about love that keeps living, even after loss." As she cut the ribbon, people clapped and children ran inside with excitement. There was laughter, music, and tears. The kind of tears that come from joy, not sorrow.